As soon as Mrs. Capone comes on board, Piper claims the bench next to her, and I sit behind them. Hello, Piper holds her hand out to Mrs. Capone. My name is Piper Williams. Pleased to meet you. Mrs. Capone ignores her. She reads a letter which she holds so close to her face it seems like it would make her cross-eyed. I don't know if this is because she can't see well or because she's trying to keep its contents from prying eyes, but whatever the reason, it's an effective block. Excuse me, Piper tries again. Excuse me. She drops her small pink purse on Mrs. Capone's toe. Oh, forgive me, she cries. Mrs. Capone looks down at her toe and then up at Piper in surprise. I hope Piper doesn't have anything heavy in there. It doesn't seem like a good idea to break the poor lady's toe. Mrs. Capone picks up the handbag and gives it back to Piper. Oh, thank you. I'm so sorry. Terribly clumsy of me, Piper says. As long as I have your attention, I was wondering. But it's too late. Mrs. Capone has her nose back in her letter. Behind me, I hear Rocky wind up another howl. Mrs. Capone hears him too. Her head turns to the sound. When she sees Rocky, her whole face seems to light up like somebody flicked a switch in her head. Mrs. Capone, Piper says, apparently forgetting she isn't supposed to know her name. Let me introduce you to baby Rocky. Mrs. Capone ignores Piper. She's already on her way to Teresa, who is struggling with the howling infant, while Jimmy hops on one foot, singing Farmer in the Dell. Mrs. Capone is standing right next to Teresa now. Oh, be, she coos to Rocky. Then she taps Teresa lightly on the sleeve. Me? She offers. Teresa has been so busy with Rocky, she hasn't figured out this is Al's mom. She happily hands Rocky over to Mrs. Capone. Jimmy hesitates. He seems unable to decide what to do. Mrs. Capone takes Rocky in her arms and rocks him gentle and wide, like a large cradle. Almost immediately, as if by some spell, Rocky stops crying. Mrs. Capone keeps rocking, her smile broad and sweet. Mrs. Capone, Piper won't give up, but Mrs. Capone ignores Piper and everyone else. She's busy singing a soft, sweet lullaby in what I'm guessing is Italian. As far as she's concerned, there's no one else on the boat but that black, curly-haired baby. She sings to him all the way to Alcatraz. When the boat docks, baby Rocky is asleep. Mrs. Capone sighs. She hands the peacefully sleeping infant back to Teresa Madiman. Then the light in her face goes dark, and she gathers herself together and walks slowly forward. Officer Johnson meets her and speaks with her for a moment, though Mrs. Capone's blank look makes me wonder if she understands any English at all. Then he leads her through the metal detector snitch box, which blares its sharp alarm bell. Oh, Teresa cries. For crying out loud, Jimmy whistles. The old lady's got a piece. She's going to break him out, Piper cries, her mouth hanging open in complete surprise. Oh my God, Rocky, are you all right? Teresa holds him close. What were you thinking giving him to her? Jimmy hollers at Teresa. Mrs. Capone says something. I can't understand the Italian words, but it seems like she's begging him not to do something. Officer Johnson's billy club is out. He points for her to follow. Officer Johnson and now Officer Trixel escort her to a small storage room under the dock. Other guards press close, and Officer Bimini, up in the tower, trains his Thompson on Mrs. Capone. A minute later, Officer Johnson comes out. Jimmy, your mom speaks Italian. Run get her, fast. When Teresa hears this, she scoots up the hill with Rocky. She's just out of sight when Mrs. Madiman comes down the stairs, wearing shoes but no stockings, a hat but no sweater. She half runs down the stairs to the dock and disappears inside the storeroom. We wait, hanging around as close as the 3 guards will let us. When Officer Johnson and Mrs. Capone finally come out, she's all messy looking, like she dressed in a hurry. Her eyes are cast down. Mrs. Madiman speaks Italian to her. Her voice is kind. Mrs. Capone shakes her head. She won't look up. Instead of getting into the waiting truck to go up the hill to the cell house, Mrs. Capone gets back on the boat. Later we learn that Mrs. Capone had been strip searched to find her weapons. There were none. The metal stays on her old-fashioned corset set the snitch box off. And try as she might, Mrs. Madiman could not convince the terrified Mrs. Capone that this humiliation was the last. I can't get over this. I keep thinking about when Al Capone was a baby. I'll bet his mama sang him the same song she sang to Rocky. I'll bet she held his hand when they crossed the street, packed his lunch for school, and sewed his name in his jacket, A. Capone, so everyone would know it was his. I'll bet she wishes she could do it all over again, too, if only Al were little, and she could. Chapter 23. She's Not Cute. Tuesday, April 2nd, 1935. In English class, Miss Bimp pairs Scout and me together for a journalism project, and just like that, we're friends again. We start talking about who we think will win the World Series this year, and the next thing I know, he's put a game together at lunch. He doesn't make a big deal out of it, neither do I. If it weren't for the fact that my throwing arm is rusty and my timing stinks, I would be happy. But what do I expect? All I've done for the past 2 months is bowl. Then on the way back to class, Scout says, I'll trade you my extra glove for one of those convict baseballs. You find one of them yet? Not exactly. Piper said they just come sailing over the wall. He does a whistling imitation of a ball in flight. She made it sound like everyone on Alcatraz has one. When do you talk to Piper, anyway? I ask as I stop to tie my shoes. Scout waits for me. Sometimes we talk in French class. How come you don't want to look for one? I don't know. I heaved my book bag over my shoulder and walk on. She said maybe she could get me one. Maybe, Scout says. I stop and stare at him. How come you're so friendly with her all of a sudden? He shrugs. Kinda cute, don't you think? No, I say. Scout doesn't say anything. He throws his glove in the air and catches it. She's not cute. I glare at him. Fine, she's not cute. What are you so ticked off about anyway? I'm the one who's supposed to be sore, you know? I kick at the grass. I don't blame you for being burnt up. Piper said your sister is different. She said nobody ever watches her but you. He looks quick at me and then away. I shrug. Look, I'd just like to have one of those baseballs, he says. They look just like any other baseball. Oh, so you do have one? No, I don't. This comes out louder than I mean it to. I've seen Jimmy's, that's all. Well, if they're laying around, I thought you could pick one up for me. You know, if we're friends. Of course we're friends, I say. Sure, I'll find you one. I smile at him. In history class, my teacher, Mr. Berger, begins discussing the Louisiana Purchase, and I sit and stew. It's not Scout I'm thinking about, though. It's Scout and Piper. Do they sit next to each other in French class? How come I haven't heard about this before? I knew they were friendly, but I didn't know they were that friendly. I think about this all through history and all of math class. I think about it all the way home. When my mother leaves, I unroll the sleeves of my shirt, button them at the cuffs, and I grab Natalie's jacket. There's poison oak on this island, and I don't want us to get it. Okay, Nat, let's go. I open the door, all business today. I head up the stairs, Nat scuffing along behind me, pulling at her sweater like her shirt sleeve is caught up inside. Hey, Nat, I say, doubling back so I'm walking next to her. As soon as I do, she stops dead in her tracks and refuses to move forward until I go first. Nat is a single-file girl. What do you think of Mrs. Kelly, I ask. I'm walking around to the windy west side of the island now, craning my neck back to hear what she says. 9868, Natalie answers. 9868? What does that mean? Oh, yes, that's Mrs. Kelly's address. Yes, exactly, 9868. No buttons, Missy, Natalie says. I look at the water. There are almost waves today, but the bay is trying very hard to be the ocean. Like the bay is trying very hard to be the ocean. Right, I know, she won't let you play with your buttons. But there's something odd about the way Nat says no buttons. No buttons, Missy. Natalie tries again, and this time I hear it. She's doing an imitation of the way Mrs. Kelly talks. Natalie has made a joke. It's the funniest thing I've ever heard. For a second, I think I see Natalie smile too, or maybe I've just imagined it. It's that quick. I want to grab Natalie, hold her here with me, keep her from going down again. I just love talking to her this way, and then the thought occurs to me. Is Mrs. Kelly helping? So, Nat, I say, like I would to a normal sister, what would you think about two people who talk all the time in French class? Two people talk, she says. Yeah, exactly. She stops and looks at me, right at me. Then it's almost as if she shrugs. Okay, so I'm probably wrong, but I like thinking this, even if it's not true. Okay, Nat, I say, eyeing the rec yard wall, through the chain link fence and straight up the hill from us. We're looking for a baseball. I wait for the gulls to quiet down. You know, like mine, right? A line drive down the center. I smile. That's right. We look for the baseball in the bushes here. Natalie, look for baseball, I say. Natalie looks up in the sky, as if it's going to fall from there. Well, not exactly. You look down here. I poke around in the bushes, showing her what I want her to do. Natalie runs her tongue over her lip, as if this takes all the concentration she has. Okay, follow me. I shimmy up the steep hill sideways and begin picking through the thicket of bushes. I try to walk in a pattern. Natalie likes patterns. Maybe she'll follow along. But it's difficult to keep to it because the bushes are thick. I look up at the yard wall again. My dad said the baseball diamond is in this corner. I scramble on through the underbrush. Natalie isn't following. She's sitting down on the side of the hill with a pile of pebbles. She's setting them up, almost like an abacus. I wonder what she's doing. It seems complicated, but it looks like it's more fun than getting scratched by bushes looking for a baseball. Sometimes Natalie is saner than I am. I finish searching one patch, then look up at the chain link fence that separates where I'm allowed to go from where I'm not. My eyes follow the chain link all the way up to where it hits the cement yard wall. I can see the guard tower now, but I don't think the guard can see me. I look down at Natalie. She's totally absorbed in her stones. I don't want Piper to find a ball for Scout. I don't know why, but I don't. I renew my search, looking inside every bush, kicking aside every leaf, all the leaves underneath. I'm right up against the chain link fence now. The rec yard wall is solid cement, maybe 16 feet high. But right where the chain link meets the cement wall, I see a gap. The hillside is crumbled away, leaving a space